billionaire businessman and a scientist from Sage. Straight after the news.
The BBC News at 10 now on BBC One with Hugh Edwards.
Tonight at 10, Boris Johnson's regional strategy to combat the pandemic in England is challenged on several fronts. Greater Manchester is resisting plans to add the region to the highest alert level. They say there wouldn't be enough government support for those affected.
This is an important moment. Greater Manchester will stand firm. We are fighting back for fairness and for the health of our people.
And we'll have the latest from Lancashire as talks go on through the evening. Local leaders here are considering an offer from government to move to a very high COVID alert level.
And across England, some 28 million people, including everyone in London, will now find themselves in the second highest category. We'll have all the latest details, as more than half of England's population will now be living under high or very high alert restrictions. Also tonight, safety concerns at a coronavirus testing laboratory. Former staff say they were at risk. The owners say strict measures are in place. In the key state of Florida, we look at the strength of the Latino vote, with the US presidential election less than 3 weeks away. And the Queen takes on her first public engagement outside a royal residence in 7 months.
And coming up in sport on BBC News, the EFL decide against taking a £50 million rescue package from the Premier League, saying it fails to meet the requirements of all 72 clubs.
Good evening. Boris Johnson's strategy to tackle the pandemic on a regional level in England is now being challenged on several fronts. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Labour's Andy Burnham, is resisting plans to place the region in Tier 3 with the toughest restrictions. He said it would amount to a punishing lockdown without proper support for the people and businesses affected. His views were backed by some Conservative MPs and local council leaders. Now, the picture across England is changing rather rapidly. The grey area on the map is a medium alert. That means the 10 p.m. curfew and the rule of 6. The expanding orange areas will be on high alert from midnight tomorrow, and this will now include cities, towns and villages stretching from Barrow-in-Furness in Cumbria to Elmbridge down in Surrey. It includes London and Essex and York. And yes, that means that 28 million people will no longer be able to mix indoors with other households. At the moment, only the Liverpool City region is in the red Tier 3, that's on very high alert, where people are banned from mixing with other households indoors, as well as in most settings outdoors. But as I mentioned a few moments ago, Greater Manchester and Lancashire could soon be added to that red category. Well, first tonight, our political editor Laura Kuensberg reports on a government strategy that's under strain.
Is it too late to stop the northwest doors closing? The government wants Bolton and every part of Greater Manchester in a limited lockdown. Pubs and bars shut, travel restrictions, no household mixing. But students Dominic and Connor say at college everyone's already ignoring the rules.
Even though we might be locked down, people are still going out, innit? So, like, what's the point?
Today I've been mixed with a load of other people. Like, there's no social distancing, no nothing.
Angela's had enough.
I'm sick of it.
But Georgia thinks a limited lockdown could be worth it.
As long as it curbs the stem of coronavirus before Christmas and people are then able to see friends and family around the time, that's kind of what my big concern is.
It's not happening for now, though. Listen to the resistance from the Mayor of Greater Manchester after angry conversations with Number 10.
They are asking us to gamble our residents' jobs, homes and businesses and a large chunk of our economy on a strategy that their own experts tell them might not work. Greater Manchester, the Liverpool City region and Lancashire are being set up as the canaries in the coal mine for an experimental regional lockdown strategy. This is an important moment. Greater Manchester will stand firm.
No applause from 200 miles away, though. There have been furious calls between ministers and MPs, including angry Tories. But the government's not ready to force the North West, still trying to persuade.
So I call upon local leaders to set aside this party politics and to work with us to put in place the measures that are needed in Greater Manchester, across the North West, so that we can deal with this virus and support people through it.
The reluctance of politicians on the ground to back harsher restrictions has been the concern that those who live there will lose out. Where firms have to close, the Treasury's promised to stump up 2/3 of wages and workers could top up with benefits. But a well-respected former government advisor says that just doesn't cut it.
We are looking at a period of destitution. Do we want to go back to the days where people can't put shoes on their children's feet? This is what we are talking about. Are we actually asking people in places like Liverpool to go out and prostitute themselves so that actually they can put food on the table?
But more than 20 million people do know tonight they'll face extra limits on their lives from midnight on Friday. Right across London, Essex, York, parts of Derbyshire and Cumbria, meeting friends indoors is off. For Sue Maybanks, it's yet more time home alone.
Well, I haven't seen anybody inside my flat since March. It's lonely. So that's why I come out, chat to friends, outside in the fresh air. What else can you do?
Martin says his dry cleaning business is already on its knees.
We're in tier 1 and business is completely dead. Look at it. If we go to tier 2, I don't think it'll make much difference anyway.
And Bajina worries about more time indoors with the kids.
I had her at home with me for 6 months, which was so hard to keep her entertained.
Unlike his counterparts in the north of England, the London mayor had been pushing for tighter rules.
The virus is spreading rapidly in every corner of our city. Nobody wants to see more restrictions, but this is deemed to be necessary in order to protect Londoners. I must warn Londoners that we've got a difficult winter ahead.
Downing Street wants to push and pull different parts of the country in and out of limited lockdowns to match the spread of the disease. But those differences mean a clash, a war of words at least, between national and local leaders. But in the end, it's number 10 that has the power to impose tighter rules. But remember, the Tories want to keep their newfound friends in the north. There is no easy way out for either side. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, the Mayor of London, Labour's Sadiq Khan, said there was simply no other option than to introduce the new restrictions there. He said he would continue to press the government for more financial support, but added that the winter months would be difficult. More concerns have been raised about the impact of the restrictions on businesses, particularly in the hospitality sector, with London's 10,000 pubs and restaurants. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has more details.
London's ability to meet up, drink up and to eat out has already been limited. Theatres shut, nightclubs closed, pubs finishing early, and now 9 million Londoners facing more restrictions.
We've only got a small garden here. And
Lauren Johns owns a pub in Hackney in East London. Her area has some of the capital's highest COVID rates. She's now scared what direction her business will go in.
We already had to reduce our capacity massively to allow for social distancing. And then the 10 p.m. curfew, that's cut trade by about 25%. As then now this, not allowing households to mix indoors, it's just a triple whammy. We've got such restrictions on us now, but no financial backing from the government, unless we're forced to close, but that won't happen until the next year.
Nearby, Ebony Ferguson and her 4 children can look out over London, but worry like many in the city without gardens, how they'll see relations. Now facing the same problems as many have in parts of the north for months.
My eldest is autistic and partially sighted, and he sees his nana every weekend. So that's a break in his pattern, so he's going to struggle with that. I don't think their nana's going to be able to be outside. It's too cold for her.
But half an hour's drive from Hackney, over the River Thames, most of the areas in South London have lower rates of COVID cases. Some here don't think all of London should be stopped from mixing inside with other households.
But politicians are adamant the new restrictions must go across the whole of London.
because they say Londoners don't work and socialise and live in the same places, and that COVID cases are going up across every borough in the city. In Southwark by Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, the area only has nearly half the rate of COVID cases compared to London's worst areas. Unfortunately, the stage is set for more job losses.
We'll see by the end of October, yes, I think we will have lost 120 staff. And we've got people who've been working with us for 10 years who've been made redundant, so it's breaking the heart of everyone. And I don't think we're going to see a London nightlife until vaccine is arrived.
Friends enjoy their last drink for a while. They won't be able to meet inside from Saturday, and autumn outside isn't appealing.
Pandemics are real. To be honest, we've lived through a lot worse things, you know. We can get through this. I feel like people just need to be safe, stay at home and just follow the restrictions that are in place.
Harder for pubs and restaurants, tougher for families, difficult for friends. Like Leeds, like Birmingham and elsewhere, this will now be life in London. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Well, tonight, local leaders in Lancashire have been holding talks on whether to join the Liverpool City region in that top alert level, and if so, what kind of government support they think they'd need. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas has spent the day in Burnley, which has seen one of the biggest surges of infection in the UK in recent weeks.
The waiting, the uncertainty. What next for Burnley?
Normally on Thursday, I remember, we was very, very busy. Completely we go in quiet. Even I can see from outside the town is quiet.
It's not doing Star and Dylan any favours.
At the moment, the business-wise, we are getting quiet.
And we are losing money because we got a lot of bills to pay, we got rent to pay. Day like this, we're supposed to like 3-4 staffs working in here. Me and my mate, we've been really quiet. Like, literally, we've been sat here doing nothing.
Council leaders in Lancashire are in talks with the government. The most severe COVID alert level is almost certainly coming, but as cases rise, so too the frustration.
I'm fed up of it, to be honest. I'm fed up of hearing about it. It's boring mess.
I'm outraged. My children, they've had to isolate, they've been tested, they are negative. They've gone back to school. 2 days later, another child has been positive, so she's come back home again for 2 weeks. This is ridiculous.
And down the road, the bridge is still serving.
They seem to be playing politics with people's livelihoods.
But there's constant worry for Simon.
We're all waiting on a tender up to see if, you know, our industry is going to be shut down while they just fight it out about how much money they're going to get. It won't make a difference. You need a full lockdown.
I had to go on benefits. I've never been on benefit. I've been working since I was 13 years old.
Avisha lost her job as an estate agent in the first lockdown. She's 24 and still out of work.
So they basically just said, because of COVID, they have to let staff go. And I still had my bills to pay for. So yeah, it's just a massive hit for me.
What are your options?
To move away.
That's what you're doing?
To move away and find a new future for myself, really.
But there's another upsetting reality.
We're the 4th highest in the country at the moment. Neighbouring practices, over 50 cases in a week. It's ripping through the terraced housing. There's nothing we can do to stop it.
And Dr Mark Jobon is seeing it every day now. So what is the pressure like now on frontline services?
Frontline services, in general practice in particular, is significant. Practices and services are really, really creaking. The hospital is full. It's where it was in April at the previous peak.
How dangerous is this moment?
It's dangerous. And I'm really worried about the people of this area.
It is an anxious time for so many as Lancashire waits to hear its new COVID rules. Hugh, tonight, local authority leaders across Lancashire are meeting right now. This meeting has been going on since 9:30 tonight. This deal to move to a very high COVID alert level, a deal from the government, is being considered. What they're looking at is the test and trace package on offer. Does it do the job? What they're looking at is the financial support package on offer. The question is the government offering enough resources to cover the hit that will happen to businesses here like pubs and bars if they have to close? I understand that this is being considered as the final offer from the government and it could still be rejected.
Ed, many thanks again. Ed Thomas, our special correspondent there with the situation in Burnley and in Lancashire tonight. And as Ed was saying, really at the heart of the disagreement between regional leaders in England and the government is this question of how much financial support is needed for those areas facing much higher restrictions. Let's talk to our economics editor, Faisal Islam, who's joined me here in the studio. Faisal, is this the heart of the debate, really, what the Chancellor, what the Treasury can do in terms of these regions and the help they're asking for?
Yeah, I mean, there's pressure on the Treasury here. The government could just impose these tier 3 very high alert levels if they wanted to, but they need the local leaders in order to give it backing locally, to get people, frankly, to comply, to have a point to these restrictions. And so the people like Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester are using that leverage to say, well, we want the return of the full furlough scheme as it was last March, 80% funding of wages. Treasury, my understanding, standing firm that that's not what they want to do. We heard the Chancellor today defending the 2/3 rate for businesses that have to be shut, saying it compares well with European equivalent schemes, that it can be topped up with universal credit for lower paid workers. But that's not the only issue. In the tier 2, the high alert level areas, you have this issue where some businesses have their business model temporarily crippled, thinking of pubs where you can't meet between different households indoors, and yet they don't have that level of support. They have a considerably lower level of support. The worst of both worlds is what they're calling it. They need support. London's joined that, other places too. And then just in general, now you have companies having to make big decisions based on a worst scenario of what's going to happen over 6 months. Big pub chain Marston's announcing that 2,000 employees will move straight from furlough and they have to let them go.
Faisal, many thanks again for the update there. Faisal Islam, our economics editor. Well, let's have our nightly look at the latest government figures then, and they show that there were 18,980 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. And that means the average number of new cases reported per day in the past week is 15,973. And as new cases have climbed, so have daily hospital admissions, with 730 people being admitted on average each day over the past week. That number does not include the picture in Scotland. 138 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. It means on average in the past week 100 deaths were announced every day, and that takes the total official number of deaths so far in this pandemic across the UK to 43,293. Now, the test and trace scheme in England has had its worst performing week since the beginning of July when it comes to reaching the contacts of those infected in the community. The tracing team only reached 58% of contacts of those testing positive in the week ending the 7th of October. Our health editor Hugh Pym has been looking at why the system is still struggling to deliver.
Could this be the future for mass testing of the population? Children arriving at school in Southampton drop off saliva samples which are tested for coronavirus. It's easy for them to do with quick results and is now part of a trial to assess the potential.
We know we can turn around those results within 24 to 48 hours. So it's a great opportunity not just to keep children and teachers within school settings, but also more broadly to other businesses and settings too.
That's the aim, but right now the system for testing using swabs and following up contacts in England is under strain. Ministers say capacity is being increased up 10% in a week, but some say it's not working efficiently.
And a lot of the calls were essentially repeat calls.
Martin's family are self-isolating after 2 tested positive, but they were surprised to get dozens of calls from test and trace staff.
We probably needed 4 or 5 phone calls to tell us what our end date was and how we were doing, but that's it. And so the other 32 phone calls could have been given to other families.
In the first week in October, the number of results back in 24 hours for people going to testing centres in England was 32.6%, slightly better than the week before, but much lower than in June. Just 57.6% of close contacts of those testing positive in the community were reached and asked to self-isolate, down from 62.5% the previous week. Senior health officials say testing and tracing gets more and more difficult as case numbers accelerate across the population, and it's really most effective when infection rates are lower than they are now, and local outbreaks can be quickly identified and tackled.
The sorts of restrictions that we're seeing coming in, of course they are to save lives, but they're also to reduce the number of cases in circulation so that it comes down to a manageable level, so that the test and trace system is able to work so effectively that it will be able to find a much higher proportion of the people who are at risk.
In Spain, the testing system may be working, but tracing said to be very patchy. In Berlin, long queues have built up outside testing centres. Test and trace problems are not just limited to parts of the UK. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
People who've been working at one coronavirus testing laboratory have told a joint investigation by the BBC and the online newspaper The Independent of their concerns about safety standards. One scientist who worked at the Milton Keynes Lighthouse lab claimed that staff were being put at risk. The Health and Safety Executive has found breaches in safety following the claims. The company which runs the laboratory says it does have strict safety measures in place, and the government said tonight it regularly reviews and inspects the labs that it uses. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson has the story.
The Lighthouse Labs, sometimes called mega labs, mass processing centres for coronavirus swab tests. The government had them set up in order to dramatically increase testing during the pandemic. One of the first to open was this lab in Milton Keynes, where hundreds of staff process around 40,000 tests a day. But some of those who've worked here have told us of safety concerns, which they fear are putting staff at risk.
It's just chaotic, it's dangerous.
Julian Harris, a virologist, worked at the lab this summer. He believes cracks in the system began to show when the calibre of staff changed.
When the lab started in March, then they had furloughed academics, virologists, biologists, all these people. So they had the experience, right? But towards the middle of June onwards, they started to go back. And then you got an influx of these really young people with absolutely no experience.
He alleges the training for new recruits was completely inadequate.
These people, no lab induction for a biosafety level 2, and then they're just launched into this facility. And it freaked me out.
The work is carried out in protective cabinets like this, which remove infected air. But Dr. Harris claims in order to get as many tests done as possible, cabinets designed for one person were being used by two, a practice other scientists have told us is at best poor and at worst dangerous. And he says the cabinets were being overloaded with piles of plastic bags from swab tests.
The whole dynamics of the airflow in the cabinet is corrupted, and what you get turbulence. You might as well be working on an open bench. These young people don't realise that they're being put at risk.
Another scientist who wanted to remain anonymous told us he resigned from the Milton Keynes lab because of safety concerns.
We had disposable visitors' lab coats with gloves taped to the sleeves with brown parcel tape to reach into cabinets. I know it can be permissible in developing world labs, but operating that way in Milton Keynes was just inviting litigation and ridicule.
The UK Biocentre, which runs the lab, said safety was their #1 priority. It said we have strict safety measures in place to protect staff who are operating in a confined laboratory space. It said training was robust, recruits have lab experience, cabinets were operated by just one person with a second person observing, and that there was a choice of PPE, including cotton lab coats.
We believe everyone has the right to come home safe and well from their job.
But the Health and Safety Executive has visited the lab. It told us it found 5 material breaches. We understand they relate to social distancing, cleaning regimes and site safety training. The lab said it had already reinforced its processes based on the HSE's recommendations. The government's target is to increase testing capacity by 1/3 by the end of the month in an attempt to get a handle on the pandemic. Ensuring it can scale up safely has never been more important. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
From Saturday, travellers returning to the UK from Italy, San Marino and Vatican City will have to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Italy recorded its highest daily number of COVID-19 cases on Wednesday. But those arriving from the Greek island of Crete will no longer have to quarantine after the island was added to the safe list. Our transport correspondent Tom Burridge is at Heathrow Airport tonight with the latest.
Yeah, Italy was the last major European country popular with UK tourists to have avoided the quarantine completely since the beginning of July. So it is another blow for the travel sector. The good news is about Crete and more broadly about Greece for those people living in Scotland. But airports like Heathrow are eerily quiet right now. And I'm told the quarantine really is like an on-off switch for bookings. Because really, if you look at some routes that have been put on recently, airlines have put some flights back on, and then some of those flights have really filled up. But really, it's had a massive impact on those bookings, and really, airlines and airports are struggling right now, struggling to survive. Big businesses, tens of thousands of jobs are at stake, and the only ray of light for the whole industry really is a promise by ministers that testing, privately funded testing paid for by the passenger, might at some point next month mean you only have to quarantine for a week instead of 2 weeks.
Tom, many thanks there for the update. Tom Burridge, correspondent at Heathrow. Margaret Ferrier, the the former SNP MP who travelled from London to Glasgow after testing positive for coronavirus, will face no further action from the Metropolitan Police. Officers said that they decided not to take the matter any further as regulations on self-isolation in England came into force after she was tested. However, they have referred the case to Police Scotland. The former SNP MP has resisted calls to resign, stating that her actions were out of character. Now, EU leaders have called for trade talks with the UK to continue beyond the end of the week, which was the deadline suggested by Boris Johnson. They said progress in key areas was not sufficient to reach a deal this week. The EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said that new intensive talks should aim to reach a deal around the end of October. But the UK negotiator, David Frost, said he'd been disappointed by the EU's approach. Let's go live to Brussels and our Europe editor, Katja Adler. So, talk of deadlines, Katja, and deadlines being passed. Do you detect any sign of progress towards some kind of deal?
Well, look, Hugh, we've got so used to all the finger pointing and the recriminations over the last few months of negotiations, but now we really are in the last stages, and it's important to have a look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is actually COVID, rising infections, not just in the UK, but across the EU, all of the costs of reintroducing partial lockdown. So the last thing that EU leaders want to throw into the mix is the practical and political and economic costs of having no deal with the UK. Now, they're assuming that Boris Johnson feels the same way, so they're hoping that a deal can be reached over the next few weeks. But, Hugh, you know that expression that things have to get worse before they get better. What we heard from EU leaders at their summit today is they think the UK has to do most of the compromising necessary to reach a deal. Of course, the UK doesn't agree. As you said, David Frost, the UK's chief negotiator, said he was surprised and disappointed at the EU attitude. So will the Prime Minister accept the EU offer of speeding up and further intensifying talks so the two sides can see the whites of each other's eyes over the next few weeks? He said he'll give us his response tomorrow.
Katja, many thanks. We'll talk again tomorrow, I'm sure. That's Katja Adler there, our Europe editor in Brussels. Now, this week we've been looking at the state of the US presidential campaigns in the key electoral state of Florida. There, the so-called Latino vote accounts for around a sixth of the electorate. And with less than 3 weeks to polling day, both Democrats and Republicans are working very hard to win their support. From Miami, our North America editor, John Sopel, sent this report.
This is Donald Trump's Hispanic Armada making a splash against Miami's famous skyline. Around 200 boats. It's chaotic, noisy and exuberant. If every election throws up a new way of campaigning, this is 2020's innovation, the boat parade. The president's son Eric is the star attraction.
Eric, you're feeling confident. How are you feeling? Oh, you tell me how it looks, right? Is there love in this country or is there love in this country? Tremendous love. We're going to win this thing. We're absolutely going to win Trump 2020!
If you look at the polls, Donald Trump is facing, well, very strong headwinds. He's being outspent. In key battleground states, he's down. But among Hispanic voters, his head is above water. And in this critical state, that could be a vital lifeline.
The Hispanic and Latino vote in Florida is critical.
Many of these Latinos have already seen what the rhetoric is on the left side, pushing socialism, free stuff. They don't want it. They are hard-working Americans that are here, and they want the freedom to choose. They want Donald Trump.
Both sides are pouring millions into ads for the Hispanic TV market.
So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
Joe Biden está de...
Even on Spanish language stations, there's no escape from the election.
Adiós.
For president, did you vote for Biden or Trump?
I voted for Biden.
Biden? Well, thank you.
But the Hispanic vote is not a monolithic bloc, as this Democratic canvasser in Little Havana explains.
Here, the community is not just the Latino vote. It is the Cuban vote, the Honduran vote, the Venezuelan vote. And so it's important to kind of understand where these people are coming from.
Joe Biden was here earlier in the week, and though he has a spring in his step, polls suggest he's doing way worse among Latino voters than Hillary Clinton was 4 years ago. But why? The number 2 in the Democratic Party for the crucial Miami-Dade district gives a brutally candid answer.
The Trump administration has run a playbook which has been sheer genius for the past 3 years, and basically it just says Democrats are socialist.
And that's hurting you?
So when you come from a country in Latin America that everything you've had was taken away from you under the guise that it's a socialist government, which is really a left-wing dictatorship, then when you hear that the Democrats are socialist, you're running away.
As these Trump boater voters discover today, the climate in Florida changes fast. Predicting whether it will be sunshine or heavy rain come November the 3rd is decidedly risky. John Sopel, BBC News, Miami.
Now, for the first time since the spring lockdown, the Queen has carried out a public engagement outside a royal residence. She was joined by Prince William for the visit to the Porton Down laboratory near Salisbury. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, has this report.
Out and about again on official duty for the first time for 7 months. The Queen, accompanied by Prince William, was at Porton Down. Socially distanced, of course, but without face masks. Everyone they met had tested negative for coronavirus.
Explosives detection capability with the military.
They were shown the latest in bomb detection technology, machines that can detect 1/1000th of a gram of explosives, and sniffer dogs, which do it the old-fashioned way, with a keen nose and a waggly tail. And so to the subject which is dominating all of our lives, the pandemic.
And no one knows what's going to come next.
And the scientists whose lives are spent dealing with deadly viruses. The Queen listened and expressed a universal concern.
Well, now it's doubling itself again, isn't it?
It is unfortunately on the rise.
In ordinary times, it would have been a routine royal visit. A plaque was unveiled to mark the opening of a new building. A visitor's book was signed. Proof we've been here, said the Queen. But these are not ordinary times. It's been one of the most exceptional years of her long reign. And the fact that she was there, resuming her public duties, albeit with great caution, was a token of what, as head of state, she does, to reassure people that even with all the current difficulties, a pattern of life can continue. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
That's it from us. Now on BBC One, it's time